Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. Hope the birds are singing. Hope the wind is at your back. Got a great show for everyone and just different all around original thinkers. So aloha and welcome to a conversation that promises to weave together threads of science, philosophy, and the profound mystery of nature. Today we're joined by Oli Gen-Bash, a pioneer in the intersection of human consciousness and the enigmatic world of fungi and plants. With a deep root passion for psychedelic exploration, Oli has not only spoken at groundbreaking events like Breaking Convention and Product Earth, but also cultivated a community of curiosity and collaboration as the founder of the Fungi Consultant and head of Mycology at Product Earth. A politics postgraduate with a focus on philosophy, mysticism, and critical thinking, Oli approaches the complexities of human experience with the precision of an analyst and the creativity of a musician. As the co-founder of the University of Canterbury Psychedelic Society, now the longest running student psychedelic society in the UK, he has helped catalyze a movement of open inquiry and connection, even hosting the inaugural Breaking Convention conference in 2011. Oli's fascination with mycelium is no mere metaphor. He embodies its principles of interconnection and resource sharing, bridging diverse perspectives to inspire collaboration and empowerment, whether he's exploring the symbiotic relationship between humans and nature or harmonizing the realms of politics and mysticism. Oli brings a rare blend of analytical rigor and creative innovation to every endeavor. And I'm so stoked you're here. Oli, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you, George. That's a great introduction. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I'm doing great. It's the end of the day, nearly in the UK, but the sun has been shining, which is a rarity, especially at this time of the year. So it's been great. Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. It's such an interesting time to be alive. Like I really feel like we're on the cusp of changing here in with revolution, whether it's psychedelics or just relationships seem to be changing in everyone's lives so fast these days. I'm just seeing so much of it. I'm like, what comes to mind? Kind of throw all that out there.
Sorry, say that again. You broke up just a little bit there when you asked that question.
We're having a little bit technical there.
Mhm.
I lost you there for a minute, Oli. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Just what was the question you asked at the end?
There we go. So the question is, with so much change going on right now, what are some things that you have been speaking about recently that are at the top of your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really fascinating time, particularly with the way in which people are engaging with psychedelics, the way in which people are talking about psychedelics as this healing modality, which of course they are. It's undeniable the importance of psychedelics being looked at in this way. But what's on my mind at the moment is what seems to be a loss of the psychedelic counterculture, the stuff that for me personally got me really interested in psychedelics, the music, the art, the philosophy, the spirituality, that tends to feel like a bit of an afterthought at the moment. And I understand where society is moving. We're moving in this, I guess you could call it an accelerationist place where we want to figure everything out. And I'm certainly that way when it comes to things like functional mushrooms. I want to know what they're doing for us. But I think with psychedelics, it's all still quite new. I guess in terms of the resurgence, it's still quite new, and I wonder if there's a bit of energy that's rushing ahead because we're in this accelerationist mindset, and people often talk in ways where it's axiomatic. We must do this. We have to do this because of this problem. We have to further access for psychedelic therapy, and everyone just says yes. And, you know, overwhelmingly, everyone is in support of that. And then I find myself being a little bit hesitant and uneasy. I don't know if it's sort of, you could call it neurodivergent thinking, but there's something there which wants me to just rein things back a little bit and still stay in touch with the threads of that psychedelic counterculture that doesn't necessarily rush ahead in trying to like fix ourselves. There's certainly a lot of that from the 60s and 70s about changing the world and the social change, but I think that's quite different to, hey, we've got a mental health problem and we have something, we have the solution, we're going to fix it. I don't know if it's necessarily that straightforward.
It's brilliant. And I agree with so much of what you're saying. You know, when I kind of feel on some level, people are really worried about the implications of an anti-war movement. People are really worried about a subculture breaking out and ruining it for everybody else, whoever everybody else is. And I'll just define everybody else as like the medical container, the therapy container, sort of the old guard that saw things happen last time and we're like, listen, man, we can't have people out there saying to put this in the water. This is a horrible idea. They're afraid of this sort of same thing happening. But the positive thing I think about that, Ollie, like that is the point which forces those radical shifts to happen. As soon as someone's like, you can't do that, watch out. Because I think it starts bringing people to the forefront. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, who cares about the medical container? We've been talking about that for like the last 2 years. Like, what about all these other, what about everybody else? What about optimization? What about education? What about finding new ways to develop the soul in ways that makes everyone brighter, man? Like, I see it on the cusp, man. Do you think that maybe this little groundswell that we're seeing, I know that you have been talking a lot about, is on the way? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point about the medical container, that we've had it for a while, and that is important. You know, I'm not here denying the medical benefits and the need to create that legitimacy. You know, with the Psychedelic Society at Kent University, it was very scientifically driven. It was at a time, you know, 2009, 2010, where we couldn't necessarily talk about this stuff as freely as we can now. So then we used that medical container, and I don't mean use that in a kind of a negative way, but it was very useful. You know, we helped support the people that were doing research. We provided a platform for people to present their data, and in doing so, that helped to legitimize our use of psychedelics in a cultural sense. Not because we were going around and saying, hey, don't worry, you know, we're all out here fixing our trauma in the woods. It was more in the sense of, well, actually, I'm okay, you know, being out in the forest taking mushrooms, because they are also being legitimized by scientists. And it felt like something of a complementary way. And I do believe it was. And now I guess it's kind of turned into that, you know, pharmaceutical industrial complex where there always needs to be a solution for the ills that we've got, and there's clever marketing, and it's gone totally bigger than I ever thought it could. And that's important for people who have no engagement with psychedelics. And I'm seeing interesting things happening in a cultural sense, because I really appreciate what you're saying. I also see something slightly odd happening, where there are certain figures within the psychedelic space who are rehashing this need for a cultural container and saying, hey, we need to shift away from the medical side of things and create this cultural container. And then me, as a musician who, you know, my interest in psychedelics was through being raised on music in the 60s and 70s. You know, my dad is in his late 70s. I was raised on that music, which was very drug fueled. And I was like, I grew up watching videos of Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock while he's tripping and like setting his guitar on fire. So for me, that was that direct line of, okay, I want to experience what this is all about. And that stuff really does exist still. There's a lineage of all that music that hasn't been broken. There's still that generation of people. They're still alive. Some of them are quite old, but they're still going. A lot of them are still playing music into their 80s. So we don't necessarily need these things in this cultural container sense where it is, creating a new way of thinking about things or creating something that hasn't necessarily been around before. It's like people talk about making sense of the world using psychedelics, and my way of thinking is that, hey, we already make sense of it because we have this connection in an artistic sense, in a creative sense, in a spiritual sense that doesn't necessarily rely on someone telling us what to do. It's not this thing that we're waiting for. We have this eminent experience that we engage with. We have this, it's like a direct line to the divine, I think.
Yeah, I love it. A direct line to the divine. Like it's such a beautiful way to put it. And I agree too. The antecedents of music and the cultural rebellion, like they'll never go away. They'll always be there to inspire everyone. And it's so beautiful because I think it gives everyone sort of a fair opportunity to participate. It like maybe that's because where the money is. Maybe the money right now is in the medical container. There are lots of people that are finding ways to, with certification or testing. There's these ways in which I'm not aware of in the last phase. There's all these microdosing certifications and people learning these different things. And I'm not against that. I think there's a place for all of that. But it does sort of muddy the waters when, you're having huge amounts of people becoming like microdosing coaches. I don't. I'll probably get a lot of hate for that, but I don't know that you need to have a microdosing coach for like a long period of time. Maybe there's a place for everybody, but am I being too hard on the industry with coaching and certification?
I mean, I don't know if you are. You bring up some really interesting points because, it's like we, like, yes, it's difficult. There's 7 billion people in the world, right? So there's always going to be something. There's always going to be something for everything. And, I've spoken to my friend Robert Forty, you should definitely get him on your podcast. He's one of the unsung heroes of the psychedelic space. And he actually taught Jim Fadiman the microdosing protocols kind of in the 70s, right? So this stuff is really useful, taking these sub-perceptive doses, sub-psychedelic doses of psychedelics can be really useful for managing different mental health problems and also inspiring creativity, being able to help you engage in your relationships more effectively. I've personally had some really interesting experiences and some good benefit from microdosing, but yeah, the idea of a protocol, the idea of training to be a microdosing coach, and the thing is, this for me is the thing, and it does get into the place of feeling like a gatekeeper, but there's something about it where I'm like, okay, everyone I know who's been in the space for a long time, what I would call a head, who's been, especially the people I speak to who've been part of the UK rave scene, people who are maybe, I would say 15 to 20 years older than me. If I speak to them about these ideas of microdosing certification, there is a bit of eye rolling because they had this community where they could ask people, hey, how much should I do? Well, if you want to have this kind of experience, you can take a little bit, or you can have this kind of experience where you take a bit more. So Yeah, I don't know. The people I see becoming microdosing coaches haven't necessarily been in the space for a long time. And I think what gets me is when I see certain microdosing coaches who have big followings on social media essentially pontificating, and they're saying interesting things, they're saying important stuff, but then if you try to engage with it, there's no response with any of the comments. It's just like they're set up in this space where they're not necessarily doing anything too extreme, so they're not really going to be challenged. Everyone's kind of agreed, oh yeah, microdosing is good for you, yeah, it helps depression. And then you go, yeah, I'm going to train to be a microdosing coach, and everyone goes, brilliant. And then you can say stuff which to people who've been around for a while might seem quite obvious, but to people who are brand new to the space, who will be just dipping their toes in the water, and so microdosing is more appealing to the people who are new, they will be more marketable because you're like, oh wow, this thing that I've never heard of. And then if you come in and say, hey, there's all this number of people, this lineage of people that have been saying this stuff for a while, you kind of come across as being a bit sour. And I often think, God, maybe I should have moved to the US and trained to be a microdosing coach, and I would have had a more straightforward idea of what my career was going to be. But then it's like, okay, what are we microdosing for? Are we microdosing to be better employees in a system that doesn't really serve us? This idea of, yeah, you can microdose to essentially fit in. And what I understand really is that everything surrounding mental health, a lot of it is coming from the systems that we're in that don't really line up with where we are as humans. Our brains are still set to 200,000 years ago, and then we've got all these concepts like having a job and having a podcast and being on a computer, and there's things which aren't necessarily lining up, and we've got to play catch up quite quickly. So then, okay, do we engage in this biohacking, that has all these negative connotations because it implies that you're essentially trying to get ahead of someone else? But actually, hey, I mean, someone like myself, I have a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. I do a lot of biohacking. Every day I'm taking something different, different kinds of functional mushrooms, microdosing, cacti, mushrooms, whatever, anything that I find that can be a useful tool. Brilliant. Let's work with it. So yeah, but that for me has an interesting balance to it, because I don't just want to function. I don't just want to fit in. I want to be able to thrive in a way which is benefiting the soul. So yeah, I don't know. I worry that the psychedelic renaissance has just become a bit lame. to be blunt,
there's so much. Yeah, what I mean, you just think about the word renaissance. Like I don't, or it seems to me when cultures get in trouble, they look back to a time when things were flourishing. And I don't think that these small incremental steps of like, okay, take this little tiny dose right here and you'll see colors a little bit brighter. Like, I don't think that that is what's going to cure the ailments that we need. But I do think that if you take, this is maybe irresponsible, but I'm going to say it. I think if you're functioning well and you want to get a big dose of what the fuck is wrong with you, you need a big dose of mushrooms. You need a big dose of psychedelics to really sit back. Maybe it's 7 hours, maybe it's 8 hours of, obviously you're going to be in a safe place, but you will figure out what the hell is going on, what you don't like, some things about you that you need to change. And a microdose is not going to do that. Like, a microdose is going to be sort of like Brave New World versus the island. You know what I mean by that? Like
Yeah,
it's
right.
in
Yeah,
some
yeah.
ways microdosing is like a dissociate. Like it's a little bit like a dissociate. If you take a little bit, you get a little disassociated. If you take a bigger dose, the scales are ripped off and you're like, "Oh shit, I got to fix some things." What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. You know, the it's stuff that I've spoken about a lot with people, like this idea of the Huxley soma, and you know,
Yeah.
maybe I am being impatient, and this is like the hump that we're on before we, you know, this is like where the I don't know what you call it, the stuff starts to happen, that the soup needs to get churned up before we can actually get to that point where it's integrated and we can be a peaceful society, because it all feels like something's not quite right. Okay, well, hang on, we've had this further access to psychedelic therapies, and supposedly we're, you know, we're alleviating a lot of trauma from veterans, but at the same time we're not alleviating the root causes of that trauma. No one is, apart from you and I mean, we're genuinely talking a handful of people in the psychedelic space talking about anti-war. And you know, it gets to the point, I speak to people who are a lot older than me, you know, people that are kind of twice my age, and they say, yeah, you know, I was anti-war in the 60s and 70s, and yeah, now I just kind of realized that was a bit idealist, and I guess they're comfortable now. You know, my dad was one of these people. He's got a bit of a comfortable life now, and there is that thing, I guess, of people running out of steam. But to me, you know, these big doses of psychedelics that I've had, and also a lot of bad trips, I think it's actually important. And I
Mm.
do think there are such things as bad trips, and they are bad. And I won't say, well, they're bad and they taught me something, therefore they're good. I think categorically I've had bad, negative experiences, and that's okay. And there is some use in that, because that feeling of being sat in that negativity. I remember being on acid, and it was like a really long trip. We'd taken quite a lot, and we were down in like the sort of basement of someone's house, and they put on Forrest Gump. And there was, you know, there's a scene in Forrest Gump when they're in the Vietnam War, and you know, the sound of the guns like really shocked me. I was really viscerally caught by that feeling of fucking hell, what are we doing? This is absolutely bizarre. And then, you know, I come back not even to the quote unquote normie world, but just the psychedelic world, and it feels a bit like I'm in an insane asylum where I'm shouting, you know, come on, guys, what are we doing? And meanwhile, everyone else, it's like they've had the soma. Everyone's got their, and maybe it's because I'm not necessarily in as comfortable position as other people. You know, I haven't set up a retreat center. I'm not a qualified psychedelic integration coach. I'm not doing these things that you see, this kind of life on Instagram where it's like the really easily accessible psychedelics. You know, for me, my engagement in psychedelics, it wasn't easy to access. You know, I remember pulling my hair out, you know, when I was like 21, one day when we thought we were going to get some acid, and it just totally flopped and didn't happen. And I was furious. And now it's like, you know, yeah, people can just go on a retreat. If you've got enough money, you can go and do these things. So it's almost like people talk about psychedelics as being a quick fix to that spiritual path, that journey. But actually, there's a lot involved in talking to people, in fostering that community, in being able to acquire the tools to get to that point. You actually need to be initiated. So I wonder if we've lost that with the easy access, the microdosing coaches, this kind of, yeah, brave new world type thing that I sort of want to deny, but I see it happening a lot, where I more and more feel like the turd in the punch bowl at events and conversations when I bring up stuff. And the response that I get overwhelmingly is one of like, can you not can you not make this conversation uncomfortable, please? Because we're trying to follow a particular narrative, and we're all, on LinkedIn, for example, you can't say anything even remotely critical because the whole narrative of LinkedIn is bigging everyone up, which is great. And don't get me wrong, I really cherished the support, but I don't know how natural it is. Some of us do have disagreements about this stuff, and it's okay. But there seems like there's been a glazing over of like, no, come on. We've all got to support Rick Doblin and Maps, and we've all got to support, Compass Park. We've all got to just, hey, come on. We're all in agreement that we want to get access, so we just got to do it in this way. And yeah, I don't know. That was a bit of a rant, but
it's beautiful. I I submitted some stuff about anti-war for Psychedelic Science 2025, and I spoke to some veterans, some close friends of mine, and here's my thoughts. Like, there's a lot of military industrial complex supporting the entire psychedelic movement. And I know you have brought this up. And when you peel back the onion a little bit, you start thinking about the Veterans Administration. Well, who pays the Veterans Administration? Well, that money's coming from the government. And do they really want you as a veteran talking about, hey, man, the most fucked up part about war is killing all these people, and then I got to live with that forever. How about we just give you some of these mushrooms and you talk about you're getting better? That's a way better narrative for people that are making tons of money off a lifestyle that no longer serves us. They're connected all there. And you're right. There's no one wants to rock that boat. Like, hey, just shut up about that. That kind of got us in trouble last time. We don't want these guys to shut us down. And there's lots of funding coming from here. And I see that aspect of it, and but I don't think there's any legs to a revolution when the narrative is controlled. And I think that is what's happening on a large scale, and I don't know how to mitigate it. I don't know what's right or wrong. And I don't know that anybody else really does either, but I don't think you can really, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of push to solve the actual problems. And when I say that, it makes me think the psychedelic movement at times is a lot like the curing the symptoms, not the cause. And that puts us right back where we were with management of symptoms.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point, because I've been, what I've been looking into with functional mushrooms and this idea of functional medicine and preventative medicine, it's totally backwards with psychedelics. It's like we're still engaging in this allopathic mentality of, well, we're sort of powerless against all of this stuff, all of these reasons why we're in this sick place. It's too big of a problem, and actually what we've got is this solution. And I think people are so indoctrinated into that mentality when it comes to health that it bleeds out into the wider societal issues. And it is crazy, 7 billion people. How do you manage that? How do you manage geopolitical systems and all this, multinational corporations, and just these crazy intersections that you can't even begin to unravel, that have been in place for however long, aren't really even based on anything. It's like all this war is backed on debt and funneling of money from the drug war into, and this is a big thing that it's like it's not spoken about. It's like, hey, why do all these wars happen? Well, it's mostly because drugs are illegal, and we help to control stuff by then selling it and funneling it back in to then have more control. And it's just this weird sycophantic, it doesn't actually make any sense. So I understand why it is that we can't engage with it. I mean, it's great to hear that you've submitted something for Psychedelic Science based on anti-war. And, I was quite concerned last year when I saw South by Southwest being sponsored by the US Army and I think it was Raytheon. So it's like, sometimes, I mean, I've done a lot of, my research into comedy and humor, and I'm like, this is amazing material for sketches. But it's actually quite, it's almost like people don't want to go there. The psychedelic satirists, they don't want to go to this point of talking about the really dark stuff. For me, my hero in that, my comedic psychedelic hero, Bill Hicks, who I wrote my master's thesis on, so much, I was starting watching him when I was 16, and so much of that was about war, and it was so dark but so funny. And he didn't necessarily have anything to lose. He didn't have a seat at the table that he was worried about losing. And I worry that there's people in the space that afford the benefits of having a seat at the table, afford the benefits of being invited to lots of events and having prominence, whilst also being able to poke fun. And I worry that becomes a bit court jester like. You're allowed to joke about these things and talk about these things and make fun of these things, but don't go to the point where you're going to upset our investors. It's and I feel like I should just to be able to say it's weird, I'm not saying anything else other than hey, isn't it weird that Peter Thiel, who has loads of shares in Palantir, who are like this, awful military company, security company, isn't it weird that he's also, a major shareholder in Compass Pathways? Isn't it weird that Christian Angermeyer, the former advisor to Paul Kagame, the current dictator of Rwanda, is the CEO of Altai Life Sciences and talking about making the being the leader in the psychedelic space? Isn't that a bit weird? And that, I mean, that's what I like to do in general, is just kind of look at two things and go, that's, yeah, what do you think of that? And often people just look at me like I'm a bit crazy, and other people stop and go, oh, I'd never really thought of that, because everyone rushes a lot. It's like we've deferred the psychedelic spirituality to the tech bros, the billionaires. It's like billionaires used to, I was watching a podcast recently, a comedy podcast, and they were talking about the spat between Elon Musk and Sam Altman. And they were like, remember back in the day when billionaires would just silently kill someone and not be on Twitter being all cringy and weird? And I sort of feel like that. It's like, do we really need these guys on Twitter waxing lyrical about psychedelics? Do we need this level of engagement and interest? It all seems a bit full on and creepy, I think.
Man, so many great points in there. So I on topic of Palantir, I recently saw they had there was a viral clip that kind of went around, and it was, I think the guy's name is Alex Karp. He's the CEO, and for his meeting, he just came out and he was like, you know what, we're crushing it. We are a technology company, and sometimes we got to kill people. I was like, whoa, listen to this guy. This stock shoots up through the roof. I'm like, whoa, it is amazing to think okay, let me throw this one out, Jolly. Ollie, I was talking to Josh Hardman the other night.
Oh yeah.
And here's kind of what I see on the horizon that I see echoing, and I might be way off, but I think it's close. It seems like an echo to me. If you look at Trump kind of coming in and you look at his background, I think his brother-in-law or his brother was an alcoholic and died from drugs.
Yeah.
So Trump hates drugs. He's said it publicly multiple times before. He was at a meeting yesterday where he was talking about, he says, I think the United States is ready to give the death penalty to drug dealers. And I'm thinking to myself, what an incredible statement to think about. And it makes me think there was so many sort of elitist psychedelic members that kind of were on the bandwagon for Trump. And Trump kind of seems like Nixon with all of this sort of banter about drug dealers and stuff like that. We've already had some kind of botched trials. It's beginning to look a lot like the point in time where, they tried to put the genie back in the bottle. I think we're one Jonestown away. We're one MK Ultra lunatic away from this thing being packaged back up and put back in the lab. And that is when you
Yeah.
see the creativity just explode. You see the music come out. You see all these billionaires that are pissed off and they start funding counterculture movements. Like, I think we're on the horizon for that. Like, at least an echo of it. Am I too crazy to see that maybe panning out? What's your thoughts?
That's really, yeah, that's fascinating. That would be an amazing thing to see if, you know, those of us artists and creative people, and, you know, could get these billionaires on side to realize the creative potential. I mean, I hope it doesn't take, you know, another MK Ultra casualty. You know, the whole Trump thing, Elon Musk, RFK, it's often a bit confusing. You know, it does seem like there is a clear directive of the way in which these drugs are being used. You know, very much in this therapeutic sense, very much in this controlled sense, very much deferring the authority to people who aren't necessarily in touch with the other sides of psychedelics, aren't necessarily in touch with ideas surrounding oneness or spirituality or philosophy or nature connectedness. You know, does RFK, you know, you listen to RFK's views on Israel and Ukraine, it's like he's not particularly anti-war. He's pro, you know, he talks about his brother, you know, using ayahuasca. So it's like they're pro psychedelics in this rational sense. And it is this it's like rationalist. Well, okay, we don't want to have a situation on our hand where we have all our veterans killing themselves, because if all our veterans killed themselves, then like no one would go to war and people would really realize that war is bad, you know. So we've got to make sure that we do our best to mitigate this trauma while still being able to enact atrocities. And I know Republicans are marketing Trump as being a peacemaker, but again, it's a rationalist point of view. You know, what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, Putin has just offered up Ukrainian and Russian minerals to the US. So it's very rationalist. Of course, yeah, let's not continue this war because it makes no sense to continue this war. It's got to the point where Ukraine can't win. So now we're taking a rationalist, you know, the like John Mearsheimer realpolitik point of view where like, yeah, the thing that makes sense is to start talking to the Russians. Have they got all these minerals? Great. You know, it's like we're seeing, it's like real estate being bought up. There's I don't know if you've come across Curtis Yarvin. He's like a ex-tech person, now a philosopher. And a lot of these people on the right, you know, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, they are subscribing to Curtis Yarvin's way of thinking, where essentially you run the country like a company. You have Donald Trump as the CEO, and that's why he's brought in these tech people to help him run it like a country, where you do just make these rationalist decisions. So I don't see, you know, the psychedelic progression as necessarily being positive. I think it might ultimately funnel it down this place of control. And we're seeing, you know, I don't know enough about the laws in the US because it's often, you know, the state laws can get a bit confusing, but it seems like there's genies trying to be put back in the bottle in places like Oregon, you know, where things necessarily haven't quite worked out well. And, you know, we might need to reframe how we engage with psychedelics, but I think leaving it up to the government is bad news. You know, we're seeing it, you know, the UK, it's disastrous. And at least you guys have some access in a limited sense in, you know, certain states, but yeah, it just seems really messy at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's right on point. You know, if you're gonna run your government like a Fortune 500 business where people are numbers, then you're just gonna look at it from that perspective. You know, and you're going to look at it like, well, we can't centralize psychedelics, so let's fucking put them back. We can't get our arms around it. We don't have a supply chain. Plus, we got these guys called the ATF. They don't want any part of it. They already have a drug trade. Why do they need these new kids on the block? Get these kids out of here. You know, but
Yeah.
for me, with the glimmer of hope, like, it seems to me that, you know, there's two sides. You got the Republicans and Democrats, but the Democrats, this is such an opportunity for these people. They could take psychedelics right out of the hands of the right now. If you look back to the way in which, I forgot the name of the house that, like, back in the 60s, all of these incredible artists up by Woodstock, they stayed in this giant house. It was provided to them by a billionaire. And they had all this creative. They had Ram Dass and Casey, and all these people were there coming up with how to create a radical movement. And you look at the left in the United States, there is zero momentum. If you are on the left and you're in politics, grab hold of that psychedelic lever right now and start sponsoring the counterculture. Like, that is where these people are going to find a way to break loose. Like, they're just wandering around aimlessly. But psychedelics is like the most beautiful person in the room. Like, hey, I'm over here. Hey, look at me. Hey, check out this. You know, and I think that there's so much potential there to really free up thought, to free up revolution, and to have a movement happen. You know, and we're in desperate need of a real cultural movement to unify and to give vision towards the future and present something to the kids coming up. And there's some great chat in the chat. I want to read a few here and get your opinion on these. So we have Alignment KK says, on point. LinkedIn psychedelic space feels like high school, only the popular kids matter. That's kind of funny.
It's funny.
I'm on there all the time. So
yeah, I'm on there, you know, and I wasn't a popular kid at high school. And that's what, you know, ironically, that's what really attracted me to psychedelics, was that I got to find my place with the weird kids. I finally found my tribe with the people that also didn't really fit in at school. And we found that, like, you know, particularly the psychedelic humor, this shared sense of these novel experiences where you're cracking each other up on LSD or something. And it's this real bonding, this real feeling of like you've stumbled upon the magic. You give a little wink, little nudge to the other person.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, you know, what I find funny is when we set up the Kent Psychedelic Society and we had our stall at the Freshers Fair, you know, 2009, 2010, and those quote unquote popular kids would be coming up to the stall and looking at us like we were crazy. What do you mean Psychedelic Society? You all out in the woods smoking DMT or whatever it is, you know? And we were like, no, doing things very seriously. Yeah. And now it's like, hey, all the popular kids are like, wow, have you heard about microdosing? I'm like, oh, okay, right.
What is there something that can kick off a movement? Like, are you familiar with the way revolutions start or movement starts? It seems to me it's through music and art. Like, there's a real big shift that can happen through subtle artwork. And I think of like Banksy or some of these street artists that go out there and they put up these murals, they put up this artwork, and it's, you know, murals with metaphors. And, you know, I started thinking of like Diego Rivera and like how the art can really play a significant role in changing the hearts and minds of the people at the very bottom level. You're an artist. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, you really do make a good point with this, because some people will dismiss the cultural, societal shifts that can come from art, but I see it on a regular basis with going to so many gigs, playing shows where I see this very real camaraderie and bonding through often shared experiences of having gone through quite difficult times, you know. And I enjoy heavy music quite a lot, heavy metal, you know. there's a charity in the UK called Heavy Metal Therapy, which is based on the idea that you're in this shared space where you're listening to music, which is quite a cathartic experience, but in that bonded state you're actually able to both let go and feel that everything is actually all right. And I see it so much where people light up, and they come up to me at the end of a show and they compliment me on the music. That experience of being complimented, of being able to give that gift, and then someone being able to give that gift of appreciation, and then being, it's like I played a festival in the summer where it was headlined by some of my favorite bands, and it was unbelievable just to be watching music that I loved and then anticipating playing and having lots of experiences with people where you are in something of a spiritual state, because you're in that elevated, connected place where it is almost like that oneness is really happening. And I do think we forget that. I think the revolution can't necessarily come from everyone setting up their own retreats or being number one at putting out content all the time, or it becomes a bit exhaustive. It becomes a bit like a conveyor belt. Okay, what are we doing? We're just getting more likes for the sake of likes, putting out more content for the sake of it. Okay, and then we get the adulation, and then what? We have this adulation within a system which doesn't necessarily serve everyone or serve that oneness. So I think art is possibly the most powerful thing we have. There are some difficulties where the structural systems at play, like in the UK, it's pretty much impossible. We, being a musician and playing the type of music that I play, we don't make a living from it. There's not that kind of system in place. Everything is so expensive. The fees are so low. It costs so much to hire out venues. Small venues are closing every week. There's not the support from the government. So there's that stuff that you have to grapple with. But I think in doing so, in carrying on with that, the communities that get made are really astounding, and the joy that people have and the connections that people have. I would love to see something akin to the kind of 60s and 70s happen with more of a targeted focus. I genuinely think the 60s and 70s, my honest opinion, it got derailed by the CIA. I think it's pretty obvious. Timothy Leary was I've spoken to people who were personal friends with Tim, and it seemed that he was aware that he was being used by the CIA, and turned around and basically wasn't going to be used, but unfortunately couldn't instigate that movement because it had been derailed. And I see articles coming out that say, there was a recent one last year in the summer on Rolling Stone, and it said, the 60s and 70s derailed all hope of psychedelic therapy, providing the solutions that it was going to provide. There is this sense that, like, okay, we have to get away from the revolutionary side of things because it's not useful. It's not useful to the aims that we're trying to achieve. But then it's like, well, who set these goals? Who set these aims of whatever it might be? Rick Doblin talking about net zero trauma. Okay, well, where has that goal come from? Why is the goal not worldwide interconnectedness? As we talk about these things in this, I guess, capitalist way. But I do think, I do agree with you, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that as an artist and musician, I see it happening all the time. And, the difficulty is where there's, as I said earlier, there's not necessarily a whole lot of crossover. There's people in the psychedelic creative spaces who aren't necessarily going along to these conferences. You know, the fact that you have a conference called Psychedelic Science might put some people off who aren't scientists. But, you know, you think about, okay, it's 15,000 people. That's quite a lot of people for a conference. But then in the grand scheme of the population of the United States, it's nothing. So I'm sure there's more artists out there that don't necessarily know about this whole bubble of psychedelic research, that are doing psychedelic art, that are engaging in these communities. And maybe it's a sense of like having to find those communities that exist and bring them more into the forefront and get them involved and see what they think about what is going on. Stop deferring everything to the scientists and the researchers who are bleeding over into the cultural space and telling us, you know, it's like we've made them, I don't know what we've made them. It's like these kind of godlike figures where we're like, please tell us what to do. You know, we're just waiting. We're waiting for someone to tell us how to take drugs and listen to music properly to get the best experience. Please, I don't know how, you know. I'm like, okay, fair enough. You know, I get it. There's something for everyone. But I do question that kind of stuff. Like, people have been taking drugs and listening to music for thousands of years pretty efficiently.
It's so true. It's so true. It makes me think that, you know, there's always like an insurgent on some level, whether it's, you know, inserting someone into a black bloc group or inserting someone into the psychedelic movement, because the narrative is so powerful, you know. And if we're starving for novelty, like we're starving for novelty, we've made some of these people that are writing hypothetical papers on mechanism of action equivalent to Jimi Hendrix. Like there's no comparison there. Like why is this person who's writing papers, who's never worked in the real world at all, like why is that person so important? Like they're not. Like listen to what they're saying. Like it's really not even that interesting. Like, oh, that's your theory? Oh, okay, cool. Awesome. Have you seen this guy play guitar? Have you seen what this guy's doing over here? Like, why is there so much? Because the only thing I can think of, Ollie, is like that's where the money's at. That's where the patent comes from. This is a group of people in the back that say, hey, here's a young kid. He's kind of cool. Let's put all the weight on this person, and then not only will we get the drug out of it, but we'll control the narrative and we'll have a patent afterwards. It's like putting NSYNC together instead of allowing some band to come up and find their own rhythm. Like, it just seems, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like this guy's harmony, this guy plays bass. Okay.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that about the young people, because I mean, I'm not necessarily that young anymore. I'm not necessarily that old. I'm in my mid-30s. So I'm kind of in this midway point, and I see a lot of these like rising young stars, which, don't get me wrong, I think is great, and I champion. You know, there's the people that have taken over the Kent Psychedelic Society who are, you know, 19, 20 years old. I'm sort of there as an elder to help them and suggest things and oversight, and it is wonderful having that connection. But what I find interesting is, for example, you know, 21-year-olds who are just like come out of nowhere being propped up, and they are these rising stars, and it's amazing and wonderful. But also I think, okay, it's great to have that enthusiasm for the young people. We need this younger generation coming in to help change things. You know, there's arguably, you know, generational issues with the psychedelic space, with stuff to do with healing and war, that might weed themselves out once a new generation comes in. But actually, there's a lot of people in the space who are still alive that I consider to be elders, that I, you know, have had, you know, I guess reverence for, because they've been connected to people in this space who have done the groundbreaking research and, you know, put their necks on the line, so to speak, where maybe it wasn't so cool to talk about this stuff. And there are a lot of people I consider, you know, in their kind of 70s and 80s who might be unsung heroes, who don't necessarily get enough press because they're old, and we do live in an ageist society, unfortunately, where it's like we are, we've got the Forbes 30 under 30. It's like that's an important thing to be, under 30 years old, because once you hit 30 years old, that means you're starting to get old now. And it's just a bit weird. I'm like, this is a psychedelic space, it's a magical space, but where are the wizards and the witches and the hags and the crones? Everyone is so,
Yeah.
it feels like, as you said, this kind of, it's so funny you're talking about it in terms of NSYNC, because it does feel like there's just people that come out of nowhere, and I'm like, hey, is this an industry plant? What's going on here? You're talking about things in a certain narrative that then dictates the way in which we engage with the substances themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It makes me feel like I do see some cool threads out there, for people who are interested. For people who are interested, there's an easy way to hijack narratives, and it's through art. Like if you find an event going around and then create your own artwork around it. Like there's no reason why you can't create the narrative. And especially in the world of psychedelics, like that's what the psychedelic movement is about. It's about finding a new way to push the movement that is beneficial, not just for a handful of people, but for all the people. It seems that creativity is not only inspired by psychedelics, but it goes hand in hand with it. And I'm hopeful. I'm looking forward to this conference. I want to meet a group of like-minded people, and I want to listen to people whose ideas are radically different than mine. And I want to have incredible discussions with people I disagree with about what is this thing doing and what's that going on. And I think those are the most incredible spaces. And for everybody listening, if you're within the sound of my voice, I would love for you to join my campaign of creating a psychedelic science poster. Like there's no rules, but let me see some of the artwork. And this message goes out to not only the artists out there that may have a degree or the graphic designers. I want all you to design, but all the kids out there, all the older guys, everybody out there, I want to see what your idea of a psychedelic poster looks like. Create the poster, write Psychedelic Science 2025 on it, send it to me. I'll promote it to all my channels, give you all the credit for it, get you some exposure, hopefully. But I think that that's the kind of movement where we can begin to foster our own community. And it's campaigns within campaigns. So for everybody out there, it's an open invitation to you. How about bands coming and just playing on the side for a little bit? I think if we can treat these conferences sort of like a dead show, I think we can sort of create the charisma and create the creativity that comes out of it, man. Is it too wild to think that we can have that kind of creativity explode out of these conferences?
No, I don't think so at all. And the thing I love about these conferences is often the times when I'm not in the talks, when I'm outside talking to people, engaging with people in these creative conversations, which are inspiring and give you this sense of community, but also this sense of empowerment, of feeling like, there is that tribe out there of people that want to do really interesting things with their, writing or art or music or, doing podcasting, having interesting conversations with people that just get the juices flowing. It's like, hey, this is what enlightenment is all about from my perspective. It's having these conversations. It's asking people, hey, what do you mean? And what's that? And show me this and let me listen to that and let me play you this. It's that constant unfolding of human experience, which is so delightful and keeps me forever in the creative space. I've been a musician since I was 5 years old, and I love it more than anything because it brings me that richness and that connection. And I think these places are real melting pots, especially something like psychedelic science where you have so many people, but even Breaking Convention, which is happening in
soon,
just a couple
April,
of months.
I think.
April, yeah. There's 1,500 people, I think, that's a really small number of people for a major event in the UK, but for a psychedelic event, it's massive. So, and there's so many different people from different parts of the world that come together. And I think, irrespective of the wider narratives of pharmaceuticalization and corporatization, which have existed, forever and will probably persist for forever, right? There's these moments of creative spark that you find in these places where everyone is just on a buzz to be there. And I think, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people who are, having a little microdose or two, right?
Yeah.
So people are in that like elevated state there. There's been like a few breaking convention conferences where I've had to I had to just like go and take time on my own, not because the conversation's been overwhelming or anything, but because I'm just picking up on this crazy energetic field, this buzz of excitement that is like, wow, and that is really exciting and really important to hold on to. And it keeps us reminded of that intrigue. And I think it is a lot to do with like, maybe inner child work, finding that stuff that excites you, that keeps that inner child alive and connected to the wonderment and enchantment. I talk to people a lot about these ideas of re-enchanting the psychedelic space, connecting with these people, connecting with writers and other musicians and artists and poets. And I'm trying to always have these conversations and share people's art and champion things where I see it, and find ways to collaborate with people is really important in an artistic sense. I really love playing shows with other bands that I really love and respect. That just gives me so much joy to be like watching a band and be like, these guys are awesome. And we're playing the same show, like what? And it'll be, a tiny show where there's like, whatever, 100 people watching, but it's awesome. And, the more that we do that, the more that we engage with the practical, eminent side of things, where things can emerge, people coming together, you get these crazy things emerging that you didn't know could happen. And I think just more of it.
I love it. On some ways, like I think that it's conversations like this. Like you're talking about the band and the music you play and what it means to you and playing in front of shows. And you're also saying, look, I've been taking these particular drugs that help me with my creativity. There's not enough of that. Like there's not enough of people listening to that. I remember a long time ago hearing like the bass player or the lead, I think it was the bass player come from Green Day. And there was this interview, like, how did you come up with this riff? And he's like, oh, I was slammed on like 800 mics of LSD and it just came to me. I just played for like 5 hours, man. And I was like, there you go. Like some kid gets a hold of that and he's like, I'm going to do that. That's where it comes from. Like, and like, it's just so interesting to see the contagiousness and the sort of, I'm reminded of the quote from Hunter Thompson, like, you don't find acid finds you. Like we need help.
Yeah.
we need help letting it find people. But let's talk about music, man. What you got?
I mean, that I really like, that whole thing of one of my favorite bits is just a little snippet from an interview with Black Sabbath in the 70s, and I think it's an Australian interview, and he's like, what do you like to do in your spare time? And then Ozzy Osbourne just goes, oh, mostly smoke a lot of marijuana, and he's like, you're not serious, are you? He's like, yeah, and for me it was like Black Sabbath were, man, they were, one of the first heavy metal bands, rock bands that I got into when I was quite young. And one of my favorite songs, Sweet Leaf, where it literally starts with the sound of Ozzy Osbourne, taking a puff on a joint and then coughing. And it's a song in homage to this plant. And for me, particularly with the kind of metal that I was listening to, this breed of stoner metal, it is explicitly infused with, songs about cannabis, and also, a lot of the psychedelic stuff. There's it's you can't escape it, and a lot of these bands maybe weren't so explicit. A lot of the more like the progressive rock bands. They were more about the kind of musicology and the weirdness and the fantasy and the fantastical side of things. But it was, you know, for me, you couldn't separate these two things at all. So I have, you know, as I said, that was my interest in psychedelics. That's what got me in, was that the cultural side of it. But I didn't really understand it until I started to take psychedelics and play music. And for me, that creativity comes from essentially removing the, I don't want to say ego, because the ego is important in these states, right? I'm still me playing music. I still have to have a sense of ego, right? I play the saxophone. I have to be within my physical shell and know that I'm playing with other musicians. But it's this interplay of ego and non-ego. So I have to have just enough ego to get on stage, to be able to count, keep in time, do all these things that the ego needs to do. But I need to have it reduced just enough so that everything can flow through me and I become a vessel for the music, which is out there, right? It's not coming from me. All of this stuff, the whatever you want to call it, the architecture of music, it exists within physics and maths and all of this stuff. And then you bring it into the space. So for me, LSD was unbelievable. It I think restructured the way in which I perceive music from an experiential point of view. It's like I experience music as this kind of 3D space, almost like a structural space. And before, I didn't really used to. It's like I can feel myself moving through. I've entered into this realm that's also, it's like a 4-dimensional space. I'm in there, but it's also flowing through me, and it's like creating an interesting feedback or something where it creates a flow state. And then in that flow state, when I'm jamming with other people, I frequently will, and I'm very open with my bandmates about this, and even the lead singer of my band will almost prescribe to me. She'll be like, Oli, here's a little microdose of acid. We need you to be on point for this gig. And it's astounding what happens, because the stage fright, all that stuff just goes. I'm locked in. And that has come from many years of taking LSD and being quite comfortable with it and really enjoying it and enjoying the space that it puts me in. But that ability to not get in the way of myself and then be able to connect with other people in a way that just flows, and almost you sort of engage in this telepathic way of doing things where you become this omni mind, right? And you're all just in and you're locked in, and somehow you all come in at the same time. When you're jamming, you come in at the same time, or it gets really heavy. You're all anticipating stuff at the same time. You're all in the same space. And for me, psychedelics have been amazing for that. And my bandmates, they don't necessarily dabble as much as me, but they are all experienced in that sense.
I love it, man. This should be like you and your band. Like I can see in my mind's eye right now, like a write-up of you and your band in like Double Blind magazine, or maybe Dustin Hawksworth's Fat Nugs magazine. Like we need that. Like you can see the culture. Like I can see the culture happening. Like, dude, these new magazines coming up are sick. Like you got Jack Gorslin, who's like, he's like the new Hunter Thompson, man. The guy's blasting stuff out, putting people on blast. That guy's amazing, man. I love that guy. He's writing for Double Blind, which is a cool magazine. You got Dustin Hawksworth's Fat Nugs magazine. Like it's like these magazines are the Rolling Stones and the High Times of the next generation. And you can see like the High Times and the Rolling Stones kind of falling away, and these new magazines beginning to rise, and the artists that are coming in there, like, man, Ollie, like I can see it. Like this, I'm going to talk to those guys. I hope that it would be cool to have like a featured artist in there, right? Like, here's my relationship with cannabis. Let's do that. Let's
that would be epic. Because for me, from the psychospiritual perspective with music, but also from a physical perspective, struggling with physical health conditions, and like the ability for psychedelics to, and and cannabis to put me in a state where I'm feeling empowered and safe with my body and feeling like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go for it. Let's push myself. And let's, finding the joy in the creative art it trumps any physical pains or exhaustion, or going on tour is certainly not glamorous at all when you're a band of my level. But you get those 45 minutes, an hour on stage playing a set, and it's the best thing in the world, and all of that other stuff becomes worth it. So the psychedelics give me that like overall life appreciation.
I think it speaks volumes too of creativity as an act of healing. How many people out there are afraid to stage, be themselves? How many people have been blinded to this illusion of the race from the graveyard to the crematorium, and you got to make as much money as possible? Like, where are the dreamers, man? Like, I think psychedelics is such a gateway and a doorway to creating the very best version of yourself. And so much of that comes from experiencing what you're capable of, whether it's music, whether it's singing, whether it's poetry, whether it's sculpting, whether it's being a plumber, whether it's being a welder, being a truck driver, whatever it is, man, that kind of calls to you. I think taking some psychedelics will really help you create the very best version of yourself. And it's such a, I wish there was more of that. Like, I want that out there for the young people to be like, okay, I'm an adult. I'm responsible enough to figure out how to use this in a way. Maybe some rituals, man. There was a great interview with Caesar from Cultivating Wisdom and Gary, and they had Rick Doblin on. And Rick Doblin was telling the story about how when his kids turned 12, he's like, you know what? I think you're ready for MDMA. If you want to do it, here's a responsible way to do it. And I thought, whoa, I never heard that story before. What a cool story. And it takes me back to the book, The Island, where they climb that rock face and they sit in that church and, hey, let's show you what you're capable of here. Is it too much to think about? I know I'm kind of just blasting out here, Oli, but what is it too much to think that we're ready to have kids at the age of 12 or 14 have like a ritual experience with what the mind is capable of?
Ooh, I'm not sure if I'd agree with Rick's desire to give his 12-year-old kids MDMA. I think the issue is that we lack rites of passage in this society. I don't know whether instilling an MDMA rite of passage at 12 years old is necessarily going to be good, because there's no cultural context to that. There's no precedent for that. So I don't know. I come from Jewish society where I've had rites of passage which haven't necessarily been that positive, but it's a fascinating thing, these ideas of like, young kids taking psychedelics. I know people who have been ayahuasca shamans or reverends and they've given their young kids ayahuasca, and their kids are super switched on, really capable teenagers now. And but there's been some cultural container for that ayahuasca. I don't know where the cultural container for MDMA is. I don't know what the effect that would have, having a parent who is the authority on MDMA, then giving you MDMA and saying this is going to be good for you. Can you make an informed decision at 12 years old surrounding psychedelics? Sometimes I wish I'd taken LSD when I was like 15, because I probably would have been much cooler in high school, and it's it certainly really helped with that. It certainly helped make me feel more at ease. And I took MDMA mushrooms, I think when I was 19, either 19 or 20. So not necessarily that far off from 12, but still, I'd had life experiences. I'd been on a gap year before university. I'd drunk loads of alcohol to the point where I never wanted to look at alcohol again. I'd been smoking weed from the age of like 14 or something like that. So I yearn for some sort of cultural container. It would have been nicer to not have had such traumatic psychedelic. I had some nasty psychedelic experiences early on, and it would have been great to have not had them. But I had the experiences that I had, and I don't know. I like to think I'm quite a nice person, and people tend to get on well with me. I'm pretty peace loving. I have a good relationship with my partner and my dad and my stepmom and my brother and sister and my cousins. Relatively close to family members compared to other people. But part of me thinks, hey, wouldn't it have been lovely if we'd have all had these experiences together? And I'm sort of the black sheep in my family, where other members of my family haven't had these experiences, and often it has created a bit of tension, and that's sad. And there's often, I guess, there's that sadness, there's that lack of connection, there's that lack of shared story. And hey, maybe if we'd have all taken mushrooms when we were 10 years old and connected to the local forest spirits, we'd be more of a, like, I don't know, cohesive family, less disparate, less separate lives. But yeah, I don't know. There's certain cultures which certainly, it's like, if you didn't have that stuff, the society would fall apart.
Yeah. It's you say the black sheep of your family, my story echoes that as well. Like, maybe that is some sort of a cosmic ritual. When you start looking back at mythology, there's always the person that's kind of shunned or different or weird or even loved and revered. But then all of a sudden they find themselves way over here on this side, and hey, man, don't talk to that guy. That guy's doing a lot of drugs, man. I gotta cut that guy off. You know what I mean? Like, I know for me, being a podcaster and being open, like I've gotten quite a bit of stigma with people, not only people in my family, but people in polite community that are like, you talk about what? Oh, George, I listened to one of your podcasts. Are you okay? You need some help, man? And I'm like, no, I think you guys might need some.
Right.
That's why I'm doing it.
Interesting.
But what is it? A cosmic? Maybe it is a certain type of person that's been through some tragedy, that thinks a little different, that might be out there, that's attracted to psychedelics. Maybe it's not for everybody. Maybe it's just for the people that it calls.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a kind of critical point, I think, with the psychedelic stuff. If you think about places like ancient Greece or the Eleusinian mysteries,
Love it.
people weren't, from what I understand from speaking to scholars about this stuff, people weren't talking a lot about drugs. They weren't trying to get everyone on drugs. They were reserving these experiences for certain people, and one could argue that is elitist and gatekeeping. But arguably, if we have a society which is cohesive, where it's not one that's based on competition, but it's based on connection, then ultimately you don't need to have everyone having that experience. The role of the shaman is essentially that black sheep who can go out into the wilderness, into the forest, commune with the spirits, take that substance, plant, whatever it is, and go deep, and then bring back that knowledge, and also take on a lot of the stuff from that tribe. This is what I find with being the black sheep. It's like I often, and I'm the youngest out of my brother and sister, and I have quite a lot of older cousins, and for a while I was the youngest of the cousins as well. So I was always this, and even in my mid-30s, still whatever, these patterns coming up where I'm treated a bit like the youngest.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of like taking on everyone else's stuff or getting the blame for things or always getting it wrong or whatever it is. And actually you realize, okay, well, I've done a lot of living in, my family's all from a particular part of London, and a lot of those people live in the same kind of area. And I've lived in Australia, I've done traveling, I've been in other countries. I aren't not necessarily always kind of attached to that family dynamic, but when I have been in these places, it's felt like I've been on something of a quest to find out, okay, what is that magic? What is that deeper essence? And don't get me wrong, I try and bring that to people in my family, and often it gets met with disdain, but I still keep doing it. And I wouldn't want to not do that. I wouldn't want to give up and go, well, they're not interested. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of moments where I'm like, well, they're never going to be interested, so I won't bother. But I think as well, just still like, hey, I've got family members following me on social media. So even just posting stuff up, even just things, it sparks a conversation. At first, it became a bit uncomfortable where family members would say, oh, I've seen what you're posting about psychedelics. But actually doing that enabled, it was an icebreaker to say, yeah. But they say, I've seen what you're posting about magic mushrooms and depression. Yeah, that's right. This is the research. And then in doing so, you can comfortably be that black sheep. You can comfortably say, yeah, don't worry, I'm going to go and find out this information and I'll bring it to you. And hopefully in however many years' time, when the stigma's reduced, you will thank me for bringing you that information. And if you don't, then no harm, no foul. I'm not here to gain any points or have anyone say that I've saved them. My dad has Parkinson's. I tried I got him on Lion's Mane coffee for a little while. He tried it. He said it was working, and then he stopped doing it. I'm like, all right, there you go. At least there's that. At least you've tried it. But I'm not here to try and be the psychedelic savior. I think that the black sheeps can lead by example, really. And yeah, I don't think everyone has to be on psychedelics. I think it's a fallacy. I think it's a fallacy to have the experience. I think there's a caveat to that, because you get a lot of people who are becoming authorities on the experience that have never had those experiences. But I do think, hey, as a society overall, can we have certain people who are these black sheep, shamanic type people to hold the space, and what was called the roadman in Native American culture, the person who stokes the fire, who makes sure that everything is in check, and then the rest of society can resonate from that.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's, I'm reminded of two quotes, one of which is, being really early looks a lot like being really wrong. And, if you've had these, it's a good one, right? Like,
yeah.
And I think that's kind of with psychedelics, like for people that have been, and far beyond me, like I'm coming up on 50 and I've had a long relationship, but there's people that I think are younger and older that have much more knowledge than me in this area. But it does seem like, telling people about how your psychedelic journey how you found a way to see the world differently, it seems wrong to so many people. But maybe it's just early. Maybe the microdosing is helping other people find a way to see reality different. And the microdosing and all this stuff can be like a Trojan horse that kind of just, pops out at the middle of the night and starts inspiring people or something like that. But yeah, I know that's kind of an interesting tidbit right there. But do you see,
I think
in your opinion, do you see this movement?
Yeah, I think we're still so early. I've been having conversations with people about psychedelics who are outside the psychedelic space. And, again, just thinking about the numbers, it's like, okay, when you're in the bubble, 15,000 people at Psychedelic Science, it's like, wow. And then you step outside the bubble, none of my family members have heard of MAPS until my brother and sister have heard of Rick Doblin and MAPS, then it's still really new. It's still really small. You know, until your grandma is talking about MDMA, and okay, there's this stuff happening in the US where you have more of that scope. But I still think, okay, if you go into like, you know, I'm sure that's still within certain bubbles in American society. I'm sure if you were to go into like middle America, you know, how many people in the Appalachian Mountains have heard of Rick Doblin? Or like, you know, you go into these parts of the UK to like a village in North Wales where they've still got their roofs made of slate and all this stuff. You know, it's like no one's heard of these people. No one cares about this stuff. But they might start to care when, you know, they encounter difficulties or want to enrich their lives in a psychedelic way. But I still think we're so early. But it is interesting how there are big players in the space, really influential people in the space talking about this stuff, which might seem like, okay, we're unable to recapture some of that enchantment, but I still think there is that essence there, and we're not too far gone. I still, you know, going back to what I said about it kind of being like this soupy mess, I still think we're in that state where we've got a lot of interest, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of money come in, it's all happened really quickly, but actually there, within all that noise and that chaos, there is that room to create something really solid, creative, artistic, that has longevity.
Is that like, is that a philosophy? Or maybe you could speak about your philosophy. Like, it seems to me sometimes when I look at the way mycelium grows, like you can see it, at first it just seems chaotic, like it's going everywhere, but it's really searching out the right paths in order for it to fruit at a certain place. It's looking to link up with other parts of itself so it can strengthen itself and then grow at a pace where it can consume the entire substrate. Do you think that maybe like that's kind of what's happening with the people that find themselves taking a lot of mycelium or taking a lot of psychedelics? Or are we in fact like a fractal unit of it?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you brought up the fractal unit. I was having a fascinating conversation yesterday with someone called Jaz Razul, who's been doing some interesting research into essentially the architecture of consciousness. And I was speaking to my uncle as well, who's been doing research into something called post-quantum mechanics, which is looking at these kind of non-linear processes related to consciousness using fractal mathematics. And it seems like the actual architectural structure of consciousness might be working in line with fractal mathematics. And so then you see how mycelium is growing in this fractal way. You look at brain scans of people under the influence of, yep, you know, with psilocybin and lion's mane combination, it seems like it's growing these, you know, the dendrites at the end of your brain cells, it's growing in this fractal way. It's mimicking, you know, it's showing us this very real kind of oneness, but actually, you know, in understanding this fractal nature, we are able to engage with the, you know, it's like we understand the fractal nature of our architecture. We are able to prime our bodies more to engage with the fractal nature of psychedelics, mycelium, this mycelial network, which is working in a way which it's not like a top-down hierarchical structure where we're telling people how to do things and fixing stuff. We're looking for where are the necessary resources, where can things be best placed, where is the energy directed in a way which is going to be efficient and supportive and not in this competitive way. You know, it's like the brain is a network, right? The networks don't, I mean, in some cases, right, they do compete, and in people with disorders, they do compete. But actually, you know, how the brain is working optimally. It's these group of networks which are complementing each other, and they're not competing, and they're not trying to gain dominance. They're talking and communicating. And I'm sure, working in this kind of mycelial fractal way seems, I mean, hey, it's like the best structural pattern in nature. Everything seems to use this fractal structural pattern. So it seems pretty efficient. It seems like a really efficient way to get information into these tiny spaces. When my uncle was talking to me about the fractal mathematics of the brain, it's like you've got a series of 1 to 10, but then in between the 1 and the 2, you've got another series of 1 to 10, and then in between that 1 and 2 in that series of 1 to 10, you've got another series of 1 to 10. It just keeps going, so you can have all these information just like swirling in on itself. And I picked up this book, which is, and it's funny, I was just like thinking about this stuff, and then I was in a thrift store, and I found this book that was about the spiral in all these different cultures, all these different pieces of artwork where the spiral has been drawn, and looking at the concepts of the spiral in Kundalini and Taoism. And it's like there's something going on here. There's like a very real, if there's never been any more obvious signifier of what's going on, to me it's the fractal, it's that spiral, it's that Fibonacci, that thing which I have been obsessed with. If I was to like show you all my like notes of doodling, I just have constant fractals of just doodling. It's like a weird obsession to draw it, because there's something where it's you're returning and going back at the same time. It's feeding into itself and going out, so you're always in this state of just being open, and also opening yourself to, it's yeah, for me, that I'm all on the fractal stuff at the moment.
I love it, man. I can't help but think that particular imagery and those particular patterns are also what you see with the geometric imagery on like really large doses, whether sometimes eyes closed, sometimes eyes open. Like you just see these mandalas, or sometimes these, 3D geometrical images that are just spinning in place. And I'm like, dude, this is a language right here. And once you see it, I think it must have something to do with the reticular activating system. Like once you see it in a trip, like you can see it in other places. And I do think that it helps you further understand the Mandelbrot set or the fractal ideas. I can't help but look at a map or a globe and see all the supply chains, or all the stuff is going, like, like all the boat paths and all the flight patterns. And like, man, it looks a lot like a neural network. How much of this was conscious? Like, this is just what we're doing. It blows my mind to think about that. And then you start looking at the language, like, well, in the world, we have a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. You start understanding how the language fits in everything else, man. It's so crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's astounding, isn't it?
Mind blowing. Here's another one too. As someone like yourself who studied mycelium, I think there's lots of ways to engineer stuff too. There's that. Are you familiar with that experiment where they made like a mold of Japan and then put that slime
the Tokyo
mold
subway? Yeah.
Can you tell people about that?
Yeah, so that was an experiment done with a slime mold, which is it can act like, so it's not a fungus per se, but it can act like a mycelial network in the way that it grows. And they built a model of the Tokyo subway system. Well, with the stations all around, and then they put bits of grain in the different stations as food, and then they placed the slime mold in the middle, and the slime mold figured out the most efficient way to find the food. And so then the path that the slime mold made was then used as the model to make the Tokyo subway system. So I think these ways of looking at mycelial interconnectedness, whether it comes to modeling physical systems or modeling organizational systems in the workplace, or just even in your relationships in your family, coming together. What do we need? Let's have a think. Let's not just be in this like top-down didactic way of well, I'm telling you this is what, and a lot of families are like that. The dad or whoever it is, I'm telling you this is how it goes. And actually, if you asked a mushroom how would a family work, might say, well, we'd see what people's strengths are and where they might be able to offer some input, and we then would figure out the best course of action for everyone. And often, in a business relationship, in family relationships, even in our intimate relationships, it's not always the best solution for everyone. It's often, people think compromising means that someone has to lose out, or it's like, well, we do you're going to feel bad, but I'm going to feel good, and therefore that evens out. And it's like, how about we find a way where we can both benefit from this situation? How about we find a way that's win-win? There really is that out there, and I think people have mistakenly thought that they need to get one over on people. And that's people like Donald Trump. He doesn't operate from this mycelial mindset. He is making sure that in order for something to be good, someone else has to lose out. So, and I don't think mushrooms think that way. I think mushrooms genuinely think, what is the job that needs to be done? Okay, is there, I don't know, has there been a forest fire? Brilliant. Okay, we'll come and clean up all the ash. Has there been a radiation spill? Brilliant. We'll come clear up the radiation. Is there loads of shit everywhere? Is there dead animals? Are there all these things that need processing? Brilliant. We'll get on board. We'll, help to create accessible nutrients for trees so that they can grow. And then in doing so, the trees are giving us, these essential carbohydrates that we're going to then use to make enzymes to make sure that we're not getting eaten. So it's like there's this relationship which is win-win. And nature can be harsh and brutal, but I don't think, from my understanding of mushrooms, when you have competing species, they don't try and outcompete each other. They try to see where the resources can be directed. And I think the more in which we think about this stuff, my partner, she works for a non-hierarchical organization. And it's a charity which provides resources for lots of different community groups in Brighton. All the different community groups are supported by this charity. And when they do things, when they decide things, it takes a long time, and it can get frustrating, but they always come to the right decision, because the right decision is always inevitably what is going to benefit everyone, and where people aren't going to lose out in a way which is going to affect them to the point where they can't carry on, So, I've been talking to some people about, hey, are there ways to create courses for people in high pressure environments where you look at these principles of mycelial interconnectedness and run workshops? And there's difficulties of people engaging with people from different countries. You might have different ways of talking about things or thinking about things, and you're trying to do a business deal or something, or you're trying to create some art, or you're trying to do something which requires collaboration, writing a paper, presenting something. Could you create some sort of mycelial interface which allows you to think in a way where you've got mycelial protocols which allow you to then come to the most efficient way of going about something?
Yeah, it's brilliant. I feel like there's so much we can learn by sitting at a battered coastline or checking out the environment around us on some level, and we just forget how much the world or nature is trying to speak to us. And maybe that's because we're distracted or whatever, but I'm really hopeful, man. And I think psychedelics really open you up to that kind of language. They open you up to learning from the environment around you instead of an authority figure who may or may not have your best ideals in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that is the beauty of psychedelics, is the empowerment, is that knowing. I've had what I perceive to be direct communication with magic mushrooms, and that doesn't feel psychotic. It doesn't it hasn't those experiences haven't led me to do anything dangerous. If anything, that those types of communications have allowed me to really do the work on myself, because then I'm open. It's like I did, respecting the authority of the mushrooms, deferring, giving yourself over to the mushrooms, to that experience, is for me where that healing happens. So, one of the, I would say, most highly regarded mushroom masters, who's sadly no longer with us, Baba Kalindi E, who was a proponent of the really high dose experiences, talking 20 to 30 plus dried grams. He often said, the mushroom is the shaman, the therapist, is the set and setting, is the hymns, is the songs, is all of this stuff encapsulated in one. And actually, engaging with that stuff. Okay, he was quite out there with the doses he was talking about, but I do think those principles are true. Like, there is something of, you could call it an ancestral birthright with these plants and fungi, where I know what this is about because I'm a human and I'm connected to this web of consciousness and nature, and I don't necessarily need someone else. It's not to say that I won't ever need someone else. I've engaged, I've had experiences of guided ceremonies that have been really beautiful and amazing. But I think a lot of that work that we can do can come from establishing that personal relationship.
Yeah, I would, I've been paying a lot to like the decentralized science that's kind of going on, and as my map comes down behind us, and it makes me curious about different experiments. Like there seems to be a lot of experiments with trauma and helping out, people with different doses, but I would love to see some experiments with like huge doses, like 30 grams or 35 grams or 28 grams. Like, I think that that would be fascinating to see the research come out of that. But I guess there's too much liability involved in something like that. Are you aware of any studies like that have happened, or
not like that? I mean, there's been possibly with that. I don't know what kind of state you're in with 20 to 30 dried grams, whether someone would actually be able to even do an experiment. I know there's been some work with the prolonged DMT states, the DMT-X.
Yeah.
Haven't necessarily seen a lot of concrete stuff to come of that. I think it might be quite difficult to do experiments with people under these states. I think it's, it's going to be that like real psychonautical exploration, relying on, I mean, maybe we'll get to that point where we have the technology and the means to be able to understand what's going on with someone in that state. And I think possibly, some of the people that are working with DMT are getting there. People like Andrew Gallimore with his DMT-X studies. Maybe he is getting to that point where, when I spoke to Kalindi E and I said, is this state of the 20 to 30 dried grams, is that essentially like a DMT state? He said, yeah, it's kind of indistinguishable from the DMT realm, except you are in there for a longer period of time. And so, maybe there is some promise with those experiments that they're doing.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what, not necessarily, like, I'd be interested to see it all. The peak of it, I would love to hear people try and tell me what happens at that peak. And anyone that's out there that's done that, I've talked to Adam Tapp, had a really huge experience on over 25 grams that we spoke about.
Wow.
But I think the after the philosophical stage, the after the, hour 4, hour 5, where you're sort of kind of coming back, down the road, back to home a little bit, it would be interesting to see, and I bet you can measure the neuroplasticity on some level, whether it's through EKG or something like that. But I think that's probably where the real healing is done. Like those huge doses, they got to have a radical effect on connectivity. They have to have a radical effect on conceptualization and ideas. And, If we can agree that a microdose is brightening the colors, what is the long-term potentiation, or what is the long-term ramifications of like a 30 gram dose? Like, it's got to be stellar on some level. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does radically shift people. The people that I know that have done, even we're talking kind of 7+ dried grams, around that 7 to 10 dried
Oh yeah.
grams. People that are getting into those realms, they are talking in terms of ancestral wisdom, knowledge about the origins of humanity, engaging with these myths and legends that might have some testament to where we come from. It seems to be that these doses are going further than the psychotherapeutic, the healing aspect. It seems like there's a different order going on. There's something to do with engaging in the nature of reality and understanding things like the death process and becoming better equipped to go through that process of death and potentially rebirth. And I think there is stuff with the mushrooms which is a lot greater than our trauma and our healing. Whilst all that stuff is really valid and really important and we can get a lot done, I think, I've had experiences where it's like 4 dried grams of semilanciata, the Liberty caps, so quite strong.
Yeah.
And I had really, an amazing cathartic experience. But I had the very clear message of, okay, you've had the healing. Now's the time for the lesson. I was like, okay. So there, and at that point, I sat up, I grabbed a pen, I started writing down what was coming in, the download. And I was like, okay, this is about, and I've had a lot of experiences where the mushrooms are like, let us show you this alien world. Let us show you where we're from. Let us show you where you're from. And I'm like, oh, holy fuck. And I'm literally out loud going, oh, shit. Fuck. Okay. And it's like, really, it's like I'm watching a documentary, but it's not just someone's telling me about it. It's like, hey, buddy, this is what it's about. And you're like, oh my God, of course. I had in that 4 gram experience, it was so funny. It was like a radio host came on. It was like, welcome back. Welcome. Well, we've missed you. Well done for tuning back into, the right station. Where have you been? I was like, oh, out loud, like, oh shit. This is the origins. This is like where, and I don't know, you can go into some real rabbit holes with all of this and go down the Graham Hancock route and all of that stuff. But it's like, you speak to some cultures, you speak to the Dogon tribes, people with DNA that's like, the pygmy people, the stuff that Darren LeBaron talks about, where people with DNA that's 150,000 years old, the longest, measurable DNA in the world. And then you ask them, okay, so where did you come from? And they go, oh, we come from Sirius,
Yeah.
And it's very clear, and there's a lot of these cultures. It's like, yeah, we didn't originally come from here. And, I've had that with, interestingly, just those Liberty caps. I don't really get it with other species of mushrooms. So there's something going on with like the biochemistry of particular mushrooms, which are unlocking this extraterrestrial side to the experience, where I've consistently had extraterrestrial experiences with semilanciata, quite astoundingly so.
Yeah, it's incredible to try to explain to people about talking to an alien or hearing a voice, or being in contact with something that you can't describe. But it's a real thing. Like, you can, and we can argue what it is that we're talking to. You know, is it your higher self? Is it a non-local consciousness? You know, what we choose to label it as is kind of irrelevant. You know, it seems
Right.
to me, but it's there, and there's
Mm.
real knowledge that comes. There's real ideas that are uncovered, and it's so amazing to think about how, on some level, incoherence can breed such clarity. Like those things, like you don't think they would go together.
Yeah.
It's crazy to
Well,
me to think
it
about that.
shakes it up, doesn't it? It's, you know,
Yes.
what you know we read about with the mechanisms of action,
Yeah.
the default mode network, you know, this network in your brain which is keeping, you know, your consensus reality together, and then you
Yep.
take some magic mushrooms and it destabilizes that and knocks it out, and then all this stuff starts to flood in, and okay, you've shaken things up, you've created some chaos, but actually in that chaos you realize, okay, there really is this filtering valve that goes on to make sure that we don't get eaten by saber-toothed tigers
Mhm.
or whatever it is, you know, you know, as our brains are still set on whenever it was. So we've still got these systems in place to keep us really safe, but in doing so, they, you know, they potentially limit us to these
Yeah.
revelatory experiences. And actually, in knocking that out and allowing the things to flood in, you know, I've read, I'm pretty sure I've read something that says we our brains get hit with 18 million bits of information every second, and we can only consciously process 18 bits. So we're only consciously aware of a millionth of all the sensory input. So what does that mean? Like, does that mean that, hey, if we take some DMT or some mushrooms, do we then suddenly become aware of all the other stuff that's going on? Is there something that happens to the architectural structure of our brains that then allows us to be more susceptible to that stuff coming in? It's like we've primed our system to then be able to interface with the wider stream of data that's out there.
It makes so much sense when you say it like that. When we start talking about the architecture of the brain and concepts like the default mode network, like that sounds to me like what we're running on as a species. Like look at our governments, look at our corporations, look at our ideas. Like that's the default mode. And we
Yeah,
start
yeah.
it's like that's like the easy level. This is default. Like what else is there? Okay, well let's get off the default mode network. Let's take this sort of ally that will help us get off the default mode network. And like it just speaks to the idea of creativity. Like no wonder so much creativity comes from psychedelics. You're getting out of the default mode network. No matter you're so upset when you come back to it. Like, damn it, I didn't want to come back to the default mode network. Okay, well, you got to do the work to create this thing that we showed you that is possible. Like it just seems like real-time evolution when you start looking at the
Yeah.
language, looking at the creativity, looking at the work, whatever that means for the individuals. And man, it's so fascinating just to see the way all these things line up and to see the trajectory. Like, yeah, we should be off the default mode network. Like
Yeah.
that's good for if you want to default to the world of mediocrity. We
Yeah,
don't need
right.
that.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, in doing so, we can engage with the neuroplasticity and the
Yeah.
creativity and the stuff that is helping us to flourish and be the best version of ourselves.
Yeah, it seems so true. Like if you can sort of harness the intention, and I think people can. I've done it. I bet you've done it. If you want to be better at something, psychedelics can help you achieve it. You have to come off the default mode network. Take your psychedelics, have your intention, and it can't be once. It's got to be a routine. I would recommend going with big doses followed up by micro doses. I'd recommend if you want to get really good at something, whatever it is, write it down, study it. Take a light 7, like a 7.2. Boom, take it, enjoy it, and then follow that up with like once a week microdose or twice a week microdose for the next month, and then another big dose. keep a journal and write down the insights that you've had, write down all that stuff, and you will see the progression not be linear, but be exponential. Like I've done it in my life, and I don't know that there's a protocol for it. I mean, I should write that down and call it the George Monty protocol, the True Life Protocol.
Yeah. Why not? Why not? Everyone have their own protocols, community protocols.
Why not?
Yeah.
It's absolutely. A GitHub for psychedelics.
Yeah.
Amazing, Oli. This is so much fun, man.
It's been great.
I enjoyed every second of this, man, and I feel like we just barely scratched the surface. So let's
let's keep up the connection, and it'd be great to meet in person one day if you're ever over in the UK or I'm over in the US. It'd be awesome to meet.
Yeah, and we still got we'll talk more offline, and so I'd love to do that. What before I let you go though, man, can you please share anything? You got gigs coming up. You got some music with your band members. Any shout out to your band members or what else?
Shout out to Codex Serafini, my absolute, my musical family, my adopted family. I just absolutely love them. Some of the most talented individuals that I could ever possibly hope to play with. So it's a real honor and joy. We're in the process of writing our second studio album, which we're recording in April. So fingers crossed that will be out in the summer, maybe sort of June, July. Before that, we're going on a little tour with an awesome band who we love called Kulk, Kulk. They're a heavy band from the UK. And we're doing some shows with them. We've got a little mini festival coming up in the beginning of March, end of March. End of March, we're playing something called the Karma Weekender with, it's sort of very like psychedelic minded. So that's fun. And then the other shows that we're playing are more on the kind of heavy side of things. So it's good. We like to traverse these two subcultures. And that's we've got a really exciting festival coming up in October. We're playing a jazz festival in Poland called Jazz Jantar or Jazz Jantar. I don't know how they say it, but that's really exciting. That was sort of I guess a bit surprising to us, but it was someone who'd reviewed our album a while ago for their magazine and then is involved in this festival. And it's great to be thought of in the jazz circles as well. I don't know how that's going to go down, but I think it would be quite fun. I play saxophone, so for me, like, I love jazz, I love all that kind of stuff. So engaging in more of those kind of stylistic style of things. Potentially, I'm speaking at Breaking Convention in April. I'm waiting to hear back about my submission, so fingers crossed. And that should be an exciting event. And just carrying on with more mushroom stuff, collaborating with people in the fungi world, doing things on the education side of things, trying to set up a space locally for people. So lots of interesting stuff. But creative wise is definitely where the energy is.
To everybody within the sound of my voice, go down, check out the show notes, check out everything Oli's into. He is an incredible creative individual and true to the form of mycelium. He's branching out into so many directions, and they're all fascinating and interesting, man. So go down, reach out to him. He's available for gigs and talks, and check out the band. I'm going to be talking to him a lot more often. Hopefully we'll have some bigger discussions. So, you know what though, before I let you go, can you give like, where can people find you? Like, what is the name of the site for the band? What is the name of the site for you? Like, where's the best place to find the things you're doing?
So if you go to Linktree/Codex Serafini, that's for the band. And then you can, again, Linktree/Oli Gen-Bash. That's got all my links. So videos, articles, all different kinds of things. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here. I hope you have a beautiful day. I hope you decide to do whatever is necessary to become the very best version of yourself. And when you do, the world will thank you. And thanks so much for listening today, everybody. I hope you have a beautiful day. Aloha. And hang out briefly afterwards, Oli. But to everybody else, I'll talk to you soon.
For sure.
Okay.
Thanks, George.
Bye-bye.